All right, let's jump into another deep dive. We've got some wild stuff to unpack today, folks.
Oh, yeah.
Some seriously intense events went down on New Year's Day. And get this,
Oh,
we're going to be looking at two totally separate incidents.
okay.
A deadly truck attack in New Orleans and a Tesla Cybertruck explosion in Las Vegas.
Hmm.
All from some recent news articles. And here's where it gets really interesting. Both vehicles were rented through Turo.
Oh, wow. Turo, that peer-to-peer.
Yeah, that peer-to-peer car-sharing platform.
Yeah.
So a lot to untangle here.
Lots of layers to these stories.
Definitely. Why don't we bring in our expert to help us make sense of it all?
Yeah, it's fascinating how these stories kind of touch on tech, security, even social media.
Okay, so let's start with that New Orleans attack. Can you give us the rundown?
So in New Orleans, there was this Army vet, Shamsuddin Bahar Jabbar, and he drove a pickup truck right into a New Year's celebration crowd.
Oh, no.
Right in the French Quarter. 14 people were killed.
My God.
And Jabbar, he died too in a shootout with the police.
That's just awful.
It is.
Do we know anything about why he did it?
Well, the FBI, they're investigating it as terrorism. There's some disturbing stuff. They found an ISIS flag in the truck. And Jabbar, he posted a bunch of videos on Facebook just hours before saying he supported ISIS.
Wow.
Yeah, and in one video, he said he was going to hurt his family and friends at first,
Oh, God.
but he wanted the headlines to be about, and I quote, a war between believers and non-believers.
It's like he wanted to put on a show, make some kind of statement.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
He also even recorded a will and testament.
That's chilling. Anything else about the attack itself stand out?
Oh, yeah. 2 IEDs.
Oh.
Improvised explosive devices. They found them near the attack, but thankfully they didn't go off. Adds another layer to this whole thing, doesn't it?
It does. Makes you
Wow.
wonder what he was really planning.
Yeah,
So we know he served in Afghanistan from 2009 to 2010.
right.
Left the military in 2020. Do you think his military background plays into any of this?
You know, it's definitely a factor. We can't jump to conclusions, but the investigators, they got to be looking at whether his military experience had anything to do with it. You know, if he had some special training or knowledge.
Just so sad to think about the people in New Orleans. What a tragedy.
Absolutely. And think about the tourism there. I mean, New Orleans gets millions of visitors every year.
Oh, yeah.
And something like this, it just has a ripple effect, you know, not just the safety concerns, but people's jobs, the whole economy. It really shows you how vulnerable cities are when they depend so much on tourism.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about that explosion in Vegas.
The Cybertruck.
The Cybertruck. Feels like something out of a movie, right? This Tesla Cybertruck packed with fireworks exploding outside Trump International Hotel. What happened there?
It's a strange one, for sure. The driver, Matthew Livelsberger, he was an active duty Green Beret.
A Green Beret.
Yep. And he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound before the explosion. It's tragic, and there's just so many questions.
I mean, a Green Beret.
Hmm.
That just doesn't seem to fit with the whole fireworks explosion thing.
It really doesn't, does it? Inside the truck, they found another gun, his passport, military ID, some personal stuff. They even searched his house in Colorado Springs, did some interviews. It sounds like maybe he had a fight with his wife right before it all happened. There's definitely more to this story.
There is. What about the explosion itself? Was it the Cybertruck or just the fireworks?
Well, the explosive device they found, it seemed pretty basic.
Really?
Yeah, which is kind of weird given he was a Green Beret. He would have had training in counterterrorism, right? The interesting thing is that the Cybertruck, with all that steel, it actually absorbed a lot of the blast. So the damage wasn't as bad as it could have been. Elon Musk even said the Cybertruck itself wasn't the problem. It was the fireworks that caused it.
Huh. Interesting. These two events, as different as they seem, really make you think about security in this day and age.
Totally. I mean, on the one hand, you've got extremism and potential terrorism, and on the other, a really personal, complex tragedy, maybe mental health issues involved. And through it all, you've got technology and social media playing a role. It really shows how these seemingly unconnected events can be linked in ways we don't expect.
Right, right. And speaking of connections, let's talk about Turo. You mentioned both these vehicles were rented through them. Can you explain Turo for folks who might not know?
Sure. So Turo, it's basically like Airbnb for cars.
Airbnb for cars. Okay.
Yeah, it's a platform where people can rent their cars directly to others, like a marketplace for car rentals. A lot of people use it as an alternative to the big rental companies.
So you're connecting car owners with people who need to rent a car.
Exactly.
Did Turo say anything about these incidents?
Yeah, they confirmed both vehicles were rented through them, and they put out a statement saying how devastated they were. They're cooperating with the authorities, of course. They also said that neither Jabbar nor Leibelsberger had any criminal history that would have raised a red flag during their screening process.
Hmm. That makes you wonder about their security measures, though, right? I mean, if someone really wanted to use a rented car for something bad, could they slip through the cracks?
Absolutely, and that's a really important question. As these platforms get more and more popular, we need to look at how they're balancing ease of use with security. Can they prevent misuse? That's the big question.
It is a big question.
Yeah.
So we've got these two seemingly separate incidents, each with their own mysteries and complexities, and now this Turo connection. Where do we even go from here? What else should we be considering?
Well, what really stands out to me is how this whole thing highlights the blurry lines we're seeing more and more. Personal tragedies, technology, global security issues. It's all intertwined. It's a reminder that we're living in a world where what seems isolated can actually have huge implications. And technology, it's a driving force in all of it.
Wow, it feels like we're just scratching the surface here. Anything else about either of these events that you think is important for our listeners to understand before we move on?
I think the biggest thing is to remember that both of these investigations are still going on. There's a lot we just don't know yet. It's important not to jump to conclusions. We need to let the facts guide us. I also think these incidents bring up the issue of responsible reporting, especially when it comes to terrorism. We need to be careful about labeling people or assuming motives before we have all the information.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to be cautious about what we read and hear,
Mm.
especially at first. These are complicated situations.
Absolutely. It's more important than ever to think critically and look at things from different angles.
Yeah, good point. Nuance is key. Okay, this might seem like a bit of a jump, but let's talk about mind control technology.
Mind control.
Yeah, sounds crazy, right? But I was reading these articles you sent, and apparently this is a real thing, something that's actually being developed right now.
It's wild, right? Like we're stepping into some sci-fi movie.
Totally. So this technology,
It's called acoustic psychocorrection.
acoustic psychocorrection.
Catchy, huh?
Yeah. Okay, so break it down for me. How does mind control through sound waves even work?
Well, it's complicated, but basically certain sound frequencies, they can interact with your nervous system
Mm.
and they can potentially mess with your brain activity. Like, you know how music can change your mood
Yeah.
or how
Yeah.
certain sounds can give you goosebumps or make your heart race? It's kind of like that, but way more intense. They're trying to use sound to actually change people's thoughts and actions.
That's both incredible and kind of creepy.
Yeah, a little bit of both.
So what are they saying they can use this technology for?
Oh, all sorts of things. Some of it sounds pretty far-fetched, but they're talking about using it to stop riots, control people who disagree with the government.
Wow.
They even say it could be used to demoralize enemy troops and make their own soldiers fight better.
Seriously?
Yeah, and they've even mentioned using it in medicine, like to treat anxiety or depression.
Hmm. So we're talking about something with huge potential here, both good and bad.
Absolutely.
What about the ethics of all this?
Yeah.
I mean, messing with people's minds without their consent.
That's the big question, right? It brings up all these issues about free will, autonomy, the potential for manipulation. It's something we really need to discuss as a society. Where do we draw the line?
Exactly. So this is all happening in Russia, right?
Right.
What about the U.S.? How are they reacting to this?
Well, it seems like a mixed bag. Some officials, especially in the intelligence and military communities, they're definitely interested. They see the potential, especially for national security.
I bet.
But there's also a lot of concern about what could happen if it falls into the wrong hands.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword situation.
Exactly.
They see the benefits, but they're also worried about the risks. Are there any safeguards in place?
Interestingly, Russia has actually suggested working with the U.S. on this.
Really?
Yeah. They've even talked about some kind of joint control to make sure it's used responsibly. They've proposed this idea of a U.S.-Russia Center for Psychotechnologies to basically keep an eye on things and make sure it's not abused.
Wow, I wouldn't have expected that. Russia being so open to collaboration on something like this. What's their angle, do you think?
Well, I think even they recognize how dangerous this could be. They know they need some safeguards. It could also be a strategic move, get the U.S. involved early on so they don't end up in some kind of arms race.
Makes sense. It reminds me of the whole nuclear weapons thing. Back in the day, countries realized they had to work together to prevent disaster.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. Both technologies have incredible potential for destruction, and they both need global cooperation to make sure they're not used for harm.
Man, this whole mind control thing is pretty mind-blowing, pun intended. Really makes you think about the future.
It does, doesn't it? We're facing some serious ethical challenges as technology keeps advancing.
Absolutely. So what's the takeaway here? What should we be thinking about?
I think it all comes back to responsibility. We can't just blindly accept every new technology. We need to ask questions, consider the consequences.
Yeah, think about the why and the how, not just the what.
Exactly.
Okay, before we move on, I want to circle back to Turo and those incidents in New Orleans and Vegas. The FBI hasn't found a direct link,
Right.
but it's still hard not to feel like there's more to this story,
Mhm.
especially now after talking about mind control technology. It just adds another layer of intrigue.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, when there are unknowns, it's natural to try to connect the dots, even if those connections aren't really there.
I guess that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. Trying to make sense of complex situations, putting the pieces together.
And sometimes we're left with more questions than answers.
True. Yeah. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to dig deeper into the whole security issue with platforms like Turo. What can be done to prevent misuse? We'll also talk about what this all means for the future and what we can do as individuals to navigate this crazy technological world.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground. From those scary New Year's Day events to mind control technology, it's been a wild ride.
It has.
Now, you mentioned being concerned about security on platforms like Turo. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a big deal. When you see what happened in New Orleans, that truck being rented through Turo,
Right.
it makes you wonder, how do they stop people from using their service for bad stuff? Crime, terrorism, you name it.
That's a good question. What can they do to make things safer?
Well, for starters, they could beef up their user verification. Right now, it's just a driver's license and some basic info. Maybe they need more than that. Yeah, that makes sense.
More thorough background checks, maybe even checking with law enforcement databases. That could help.
Okay. Anything else?
Definitely. They could start monitoring user activity for anything suspicious. Like, what if someone rents a car and then suddenly changes their destination to somewhere risky?
Ah, I see. That could be a red flag.
Exactly. An alert system for stuff like that. Oh, and another thing. The vehicles themselves.
The vehicle.
Yeah, they could use technology to keep tabs on them in real time. GPS tracking could be huge.
How so?
Well, if a car goes off course or starts acting weird, they'd know about it right away, maybe even intervene somehow. And then there's geofencing, basically using tech to create virtual boundaries, keep cars out of certain areas, or send an alert if they cross a line.
So it sounds like a combo approach would work best. Better verification, activity monitoring, plus the vehicle tracking and geofencing.
Yep, a multi-layered system that can adapt as new threats pop up. That's the key.
But how do we balance all that security with people's privacy? I mean, Turo's all about convenience.
That's the tricky part, isn't it? Finding that sweet spot. But I think transparency is key. People need to know what data is being collected, how it's used,
Right.
and they need to be in control, have choices about their privacy settings and all of that.
So empowering users to make informed decisions.
Absolutely. And as a society, we need to have a conversation about the trade-offs. Are we okay giving up some privacy for more security? It's a tough question.
It is. All right, so we talked about Turo, the security stuff, the balance between safety and privacy. But zoom out for a second. What does all this mean for the future? Tech is moving so fast.
It is, and I think these stories show just how connected our world is becoming. The lines between physical and digital, they're blurring.
Yeah.
Technology's everywhere, and it's changing everything. How we travel, communicate, work, everything.
And with those changes come new opportunities, but also new risks. So what can we do about it? How do we navigate this crazy tech-driven world?
Awareness is a big one. We got to stay informed about new technologies and what they can do, both good and bad.
Don't just take things at face value.
Right. Be a critical thinker. Question things. Evaluate information carefully.
Like you said before, look at things from different angles.
Yeah. And don't forget about your own digital life. Be smart online. Protect your information. Make good choices about the tech you use.
So be informed, be critical, be proactive.
You got it. And one more thing. Speak up. Talk about these issues. Raise awareness. Push for ethical, responsible tech development. We all have a part to play in shaping the future.
Well said. This has been an amazing deep dive. Seriously eye-opening. We've explored so much. Tech, security, the human element.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It really is. Any final thoughts for our listeners as they grapple with this ever-changing world?
Stay curious. Stay informed. Stay engaged. The future's happening right now, and we all have a voice.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, folks, that's it for our deep dive today. We hope you learned something new, or at least had your brain tickled a little. Till next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds sharp.